If Devin Booker, as we expect, is named to one of the NBA All-NBA teams next week, he will be eligible for the biggest contract in all of basketball. What does that mean for the Suns? Is there any reason he should not get that deal? And what does it look like to build a team around Devin Booker? We're talking all things Book on today's episode of Locked On Suns.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 5 seasons and a contributor at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thanks for making Locked On Suns your first listen today and every day. The season is over, but the show is not going anywhere, so hit follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, wherever you're finding us, as well as YouTube, where I hope that you guys have already checked this out, but if for some reason you made it through a whole season with no YouTube, come here, hit subscribe. You can see our beautiful faces here every single day. We'll hopefully do some live stuff, some extra stuff as the YouTube channel continues to grow. That is the best place to support the show throughout the offseason. Aaron Edwards is here. He is a writer at All Caps NBA or on the Take Line YouTube channel. Aaron, this is the first time we've recorded a show since Game 7, so I just have to get a vibe check. I just have to see how you are doing person to person here. How have you spent the week? Did you attend the Suns funeral out in Phoenix? How have you been coping?
I feel like a lot of Suns fans got to not have to watch basketball, but our jobs are basketball, so like I had to stay in it and keep watching it. So I wish I could have gotten separated from it. Like when the Colts have a monstrous loss, I could just not watch football for a couple of weeks. But
that's what happened when the Colts handed the Cardinals a monstrous loss on Christmas. Is I was like, great, I have Christmas to myself.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's different for us. You kind of have to.
Yeah, so it's been harder to not think about it. But after watching, we're probably going to get into it. But after watching the Warriors and Dallas play, I just think we were going to be here anyway. I just don't think we had the guns, and it's weird to say that after the regular season that we had. But seeing how they're playing and how we played, I just don't think we had it.
I was going through it watching that Warriors game last night. One, because of how bad they made Dallas look. That in and of itself is like, oh yeah, Dallas isn't like the 96 Bulls. They're actually normal regular good team that loses in the playoffs. I know they lost Game 5. We know they lost games. It went to a Game 7, but after Game 7, you came away feeling like they were a juggernaut, and they very clearly are not. But then, as you said too, it's like, the Suns were going to have to be 101% of themselves to beat the Warriors, it felt like, in the first place. And, we were all excited. Oh, it's going to be an all-time series and this and that. It was going to take a lot for the Suns to do that. And I don't know if they would have gotten there anyway. So that was its own kind of, I guess it's a little bit of relief, but at the same time, it's like, well, you'd like to believe they wouldn't have gotten themselves handed a 30-point loss in Game 1, but who's to say with how they looked at the end of the last series? So that's what I keep coming back to overall, and it's part of what we're going to talk about today, which is that it's the kind of loss, not only just in Game 7, but the way that the Suns really fell away from their identity overall in the playoffs. It's the kind of thing where it just leaves you feeling like at your most dread-filled, you're like, does this whole entire thing have to change? You know what I mean? So I think one of the places we have to start is Devin Booker. I think I should explain how the Supermax works for people before we dive too deep into it. Is that all right with you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So 4 years, $211 million is where Booker's contract will be. It's based on him. Most likely, we all can assume he's going to he only has to get third team All-NBA, which I think he'll get much higher than that. He's definitely getting it. And so, 4 years, $211 million. That would not start until 2024. So it's an extension. It's not a new contract. So he has 2 years left on the deal he signed back in 2018. this would be 4 more years on top of that. So it would give him 6 more years after this one, and it would kick in at that really high level again in 2024. He would be eligible again for this type of a contract in 2023 at the end of next season if he were to get All NBA again. And this time it would be able to be a 5-year deal starting at, again, it's 35% of the cap. So it's the absolute biggest possible contract that the NBA has. And it's 8% raises because the Suns are the team that he's currently on. 5% raises is what happens if it's a new team signing him, if he were to actually become a free agent. In 2024, if he were to still have not gotten that Supermax extension or any sort of extension from the Suns, he would be eligible for a new contract, obviously. He'd be an unrestricted free agent. But it would still, if the Suns were able to get him back, it would still be able to be that 35% number over 5 years. Or he could go out and get a 4-year at 30% of the cap contract with a new team. So it's obviously a very big difference. The reason all this is still in play is because he's still with the team that drafted him. So that's the thing to keep in mind. You only can sign these if you are still with the team that drafted you. And then there's all these other parts of like, how long have you been in the league and this and that don't really matter right now, but would down the line. So Aaron, the place that I come down, because I've seen a lot of people who are like, well, what's the rush? Like sign him to a smaller extension or don't sign it right now. There's no real incentive for Booker to do anything like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's, I just got All NBA. I'm eligible for this thing, and either give it to me or we'll roll it to next year and see what happens. But there's no need to sign an extension when you have 2 years left, unless it's that really big one. So where do you fall on this? Do you think it's something the Suns should pounce on right away, the very minute that they can, which would basically be as soon as he gets named to All NBA, or do you have any hesitations about getting it done this summer?
I think you kind of have to do it as soon as possible because you don't want to get stuck in like the Chris Paul situation that Houston did, where he just kept holding it off, and then you're paying a 35-year-old a lot of money. Like, I feel like you kind of have to do it now, or else if you keep holding it off and something bad happens, then you're like, God forbid, like something like he gets hurt or something, but you end up having to pay a dude that's a little bit beat up and you're having to pay him a bunch of money and your roster's dwindling down. So like, I think just not getting caught in that kind of Chris Paul no man's land where he was just taking team friendly deals for a little bit. And then his number finally got called as an old man and you had to do it. Like Harden's about to have to deal with that right now too. Yeah. Like, I just think you'd rather do it now than be forced to do it to a player that you don't know what he's going to be.
Yeah, and that's the thing is if you do it now versus waiting until he was actually a free agent in 2 years, you're locking him in for younger seasons for him. If you wait all the way until then and you give him 5 more, he would be 32 at the end of the contract. If you do it now, he's only going to get him through his age 31 season. So you're saving one of those post 30 years. Those Harden, Chris, LeBron contracts, those are a different kind, but they basically end up being the same thing where somebody's been in the league for more than 10 years. So that's some of the years amount stuff that I was talking about a second ago. The other thing to me is where the cap is, because the way that these things are is they're only based on what the cap is in the year that they happen. Yeah. We know sports money is insane and the caps are just going to go up forever. So if you do it now, you're locking him in based on 35% of the cap
now.
Whereas if you were to wait, like the people have talked about the new TV contract and whatever, that's not going to happen until 2025. So it's really kind of irrelevant for Booker because even if they waited until his contract was over, you're still not getting all the way to when any of that would kick in. But you're still being able to lock him in then. So it's the years in terms of his age. It's also where the money is being calculated. And the other part that I come down on is right now, as things stand, Landry Shamet and Chris Paul are both non-guaranteed or partially guaranteed that 2024-25 season when this thing would be kicking in. And so you really have about half of Chris's contract and then Book and McHale that are guaranteed that season. It's not like you have like all these bad contracts already on your books that you're having to worry about, like the Lakers or like the Rockets back when Chris and and James were both on those really big contracts. Like, they're not having to worry about that. But still, at the same time, I do just want to put into perspective for people, even if they were to cut Chris and just have that partial guarantee on the books and then Booker and Bridges, you're still over halfway to the cap. Like, this is a huge contract. So I get the hesitation, but I feel like there's no better plan than keeping the best player in franchise history.
Yeah.
So I guess my other question to you would then be, from a timing standpoint, how big of an insult or a risk would it be to tell Book, like, let's just wait till next season? Like, we have Cam to deal with, we have DA to deal with, we have, all this other, we have to rebuild our bench. Like, let's just hold off, see what things look like, see what kind of moves we can make, and we'll do it for you next summer. Is there any way you would do that, or do you think that that's too big of an FU to him?
I think him now would do it after making the playoffs 2 years and how it ended this year. I think he knows what the team needs. He knows that he probably couldn't have left the floor. He knows how bad the bench is, and he knows that, like, the team's going to have to change. So I think that he'd rather see what's going to be in front of him and what's going to be on the floor with him before he decides anything like long term. Like, I think this is like a make or break thing for James Jones, like, because he knows this team is going to look way different after Chris Paul's gone. So I just think, like, just seeing the future and just the long game, I think he just wants to wait to see before he really adds on to 5 or 6 more years here.
Yeah. And I know Suns fans have been dreaming about, like, Damian Lillard and players like that. So just the last note here is NBA teams can only have 2 of those guys on their roster at once. It shouldn't really matter. I mean, it's like logistically impossible to even fit 3 on your team. So it's not like it really comes into play. But, as a note for people, that's the case. But I mean, even having 2, I just said what it is with Booker and McHale and 15 of Chris's money. You're already almost all the way to the cap. So, bringing in another one of those guys, or even like a regular max guy on top of it, the same conversation we've been having with DA, the team does get expensive. So I get that. I think you would have to have sort of like a handshake agreement, a wink, wink with Booker that, hey, even if you, like, tore your ACL, we'll give it to you next summer. Like, you can't mess around with, there is an amount of risk. Like, any player has that, even if they're young. So you don't want to be disrespectful to him, but I do agree, like, he would be willing to play ball after 2 really successful seasons. But what I want to talk about too is a little bit of what you thought of how Booker played to close that last series, and how do you build a team around him? What does that look like at its absolute best? So we'll get into that, guys, here in a second, because I think that's a big part of the conversation. But first, today's show brought to you by Built Bar. And you've heard about Built Puffs for a long time. It's the first protein-infused marshmallow that the world has ever seen. But we all love brownies, and they have figured out how to make a brownie batter puff. That's their latest invention. As I tell you all the time, you got to stay up to date on the website. If you like Built Bar, if you've ever tried them before and you're like, okay, I know I like that flavor, but I want to mix it up, or what are they up to now? Like, they are coming out with stuff constantly. They just released the granola line like 2 weeks ago. Now they have this new brownie batter puff on top of all of it. Only 140 calories and 7 grams of sugar, but packed with 17 grams of protein. The perfect pick-me-up. Look, I don't know about you guys. I get, like, deathly hungry during the summer, even though I don't do more. I probably do less, and yet the sun makes me feel like I haven't eaten all day if I'm out for 2 hours at a time. So don't let them melt, but bring these with you, and it can power you up. Maybe before workout, after workout, maybe you've just been outside for a while. Maybe it's been a long day. Just a snack, whatever it is. Brownie batter puff. Check them out at Built.com, and when you make your order, use the promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, Aaron. So I told you that at the top of the show, this is the type of loss, at least for me, the thing I've been struggling with the most is, like, the existential, like, what is the future here? And I've been tying myself in pretzels, in a pretzel, feeling like an unnecessary amount of worry about if Book can play better in a spot like that going forward. But then I also look at the other guys And I also feel like, okay, well, it's a lot easier for, let's say, Jason Tatum, who I probably think is a better overall player than Book, but like it's a lot easier for him to look like that when he has Jaylen Brown and Al Horford and Robert Williams and a whole cast of guys who are awesome than Book when, nobody on the team even wants to take a shot in that game 7. So how do you balance that out? And what did you think of how Booker played in game 6 and 7 to close things out? Is there more he should have been doing, or is it on the other guys to be able to pick it up and help him out a little more?
I kind of landed on the other guys. He didn't play well, and he does, like we talked about this before, he does have to get better at making decisions off of doubles and blitzes and stuff. But like Jason Kidd had the perfect game plan. He was like, nobody is going to put this ball on the floor and go get a bucket. And he knew, and I think somewhere deep down, we started to know too that something was wrong with Chris Paul, and we knew he wasn't going to put the ball on the floor. Like yesterday, Steph put the ball on the floor and got like 5 layups, and there was no fear of anybody other than Book doing that. Like any guard putting the ball on the floor and getting to the rim.
The way Jordan Poole was just able to isolate because there was so much space around him because they actually had to guard the other players. Yeah,
and I think just Jason Kidd knew that we go cold a lot, and if Ayton's not going to demand the ball, and Crowder was the only one that was jacking up shots and putting the ball on the floor, and you kind of will live with that, I think. And I just think overall, like Book was just put in a really shitty situation because CP wasn't doing anything. He was terrible on defense, which wasn't his fault. Well, we had to figure that out too, but Luka was killing him on defense, and he wasn't shooting the ball. And when you're pretty much playing 4-on-5 on offense, which is weird, then you're just easy to defend.
Yeah, it's funny though, because I feel like you were more negative on Book after that. What was it, game 6 that we recorded? I feel like you were more negative on him after that game than I was. And now I'm more negative on him after game 7 than you were.
Yeah, I think after game 6, I think that was just a game for him to take. And I still wasn't all the way like, we were all just, maybe Chris Paul's going to do something. Maybe Chris Paul's going to do something. And we kept saying, if Chris Paul does something, we'll be fine. He just never did anything. And I just think at the end of the day, like Book got left on an island. And I just think he kind of didn't even expect that to happen.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. I think I do like I'm to the point with Book now where I think you have to be a certain level of honest with yourself about building a team around. I mean, we've had this conversation about Chris Paul and building your team around somebody who's like 5'11". I think you even have to be honest with yourself about what it looks like to build a team that's around a guy that's 6'5", because like it's always been true in the NBA, but especially with all these wings that are now able to be like your primary playmaker, it's not common unless you're talking about Kobe and Michael Jordan, who I think we can agree are better players than Devin Booker right now. Like there's not a lot of precedent for what that looks like. So that's probably the area I'm most concerned about. And then the passing, like he just has to get into spots where he's more comfortable as a passer. I think some of that's on Monty. I think a lot of that's on Book. I think some of that's just on the other guys being able to actually do something when they get the ball and not, just being okay, my options are find DA for a dunk on a quick little roll to the basket or find a guy for a spot up shot. Like you have to be more dynamic. And so it's all intertwined, but I do think it's worth kind of looking back and thinking like, okay, well, what does this look like in the past for players like Book? And some of that's hard because there's not a lot of guys like him, but so 538 does these things. And I've talked about him on other shows when it comes to contracts. I talked about it a lot with Mikhail and DA when they were up for extensions, but 538 does these like player projections where it has their money value and it has like those comparisons, like what player are they most similar to, and it'll even give you the year.
Yeah.
So here's what 538 had for Booker, and this was before this season. So he's obviously upped his level. So you're going to hear these names and it's going to be like, okay, he's better than that. And he is now, but I think they're still pretty reasonable. So Melo, 2010 Melo. So like right before he got traded to the Knicks, 2001 Ray Allen, which was like his best season. 2010 Brandon Roy, which is actually the comp that Monty gave when Monty got hired, was Brandon Roy, because he coached Brandon Roy when he was first an assistant. And then 2019 Bradley Beal, which I'm out on Bradley Beal. I don't love that comp because I don't think he's I don't know. He doesn't play winning basketball right now. Since he lost all of his teammates, he just chucks shots. I don't think that's really the type of player Book is. So which one of those feels closest to you, or is there someone else that comes to mind? Like, if we're imagining a Book team, which one of those guys or which historical NBA player are you kind of thinking of?
That Melo kind of clicks because he wasn't really that great of a passer yet either, and he was pretty efficient. I think it would either be B. Roy or Melo. Because Brandon Roy, his three-point shooting got better, and I think this year Book he started off really hot, and he's shooting his three way more confident. It would be between the Carmelo and B. Roy, I think.
Yeah, I think that those two jump out to me. That Ray Allen NBA sucked back then. Like, it's weird looking at some of those teams and like he had nothing.
Yeah, I also just think like pace-wise, I don't think Book wants to play as slow as Brandon Roy or that Melo had to play back then either. Yeah. And I think that's kind of where the Chris Paul holdup goes and why our bench needs to get better. I think in a different world, I think Book would love playing with like a really fast second unit with a better point guard. Like, Campaign wasn't giving him anything, but I just think like just the pace that most second units play, like the Warriors and even like Dallas, like second units are out there to just run and try to get a bucket and just play decent defense so your starters get back out there. And Book was still having to play half court, pick and roll, and like do that with the second unit and not getting anything from it.
Yeah, I think that's all. I mean, it's crazy, the perception that there's point guards everywhere. And like you kind of start to look and you're like, who could they get? Like, I think it even goes to show like how big of a godsend it felt like Campaign was, because the Suns' backup point guard before the bubble were Elie Okobo, and I don't even remember. Like, they cut Tyler Johnson. Like, that's how bad it was at that spot. Like, it's not easy to find these guys. So if you're thinking about what it looks like, post Chris, or even if they want to upgrade that Campaign spot, or they want to kind of change how the team looks, the answers aren't super duper easy to find. So let's keep on this wavelength though, because there's a couple things about those examples, including the pace and that kind of part that you talked about, that make it a little bit, again, tough to compare, but I also think there are some lessons to learn. First, though, guys, today's show also brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the number one source for all your sports betting needs and info all throughout the sports calendar. You have baseball going on. You have the NBA playoffs wrapping up. You're close to the draft. The draft is fun to bet on, in my opinion, although I'm not feeling great about my Paolo Banchero bet. It doesn't seem like the teams at the top are all that interested. I thought I was getting out ahead. He was like just as good as the other guys, it seems like, and why not? He had the lowest odds. I don't feel great about it. WNBA game odds. Let me see here. What do they have on the WNBA side? The Mercury are favored by 2 at home against the Dallas Wings on Thursday, which is the day that I'm recording this. They don't have much in the way of WNBA championships. There we go. All right. The Mystics are plus 650. They've been the team I've been telling you guys about for weeks. Basketball, baseball, whatever it is, there is a ton of stuff, and it's updated all the time. They have live betting during games. They have esports betting. They also have news analysis podcasts to keep you up to date. So head to betonline.net today or download their mobile app to learn more about the latest trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Okay, so we were talking about Brandon Roy. We were talking about Carmelo Anthony, Aaron. And one of the things with all of those teams is, well, the players themselves too, they weren't as good as Book is, I think, defensively.
Yeah.
And so somewhat as a result of that, none of those teams were good defensively that those comps were from. Melo's Nuggets, the Blazers, they had like Batum and Odin and whatnot, but they weren't really, they were like mediocre defensive teams outside the top 10. So that also makes it a little bit difficult to compare, or even like, what do you use as the rubric? I think at the end of the day, what I come down to is this roster already is pretty close to being what you would want around Book. A lot of wing depth. We don't know what's going to happen with DA, but you would like to have a good defensive front court. I feel like the main thing to me is you just need a consistent all-star or all NBA level secondary playmaker. You know what I mean? Like, you need the Jaylen Brown to the, Jason Tatum, or you need the Tyler Hero even to what Jimmy Butler is. Like, Hero is a much more reasonable guy, like level of player to target. And even that makes a big difference. When you have shooting and you have role players, you have a guy like Bam, you don't need that second guy to be amazing, but he can be better than, Cam Payne has been, better than Chris Paul was in that second round. So what do you think is missing from this roster as it starts to transition more to what a Book team will be as he starts off that Supermax or continues in his career?
I think at least one more player that can legit ISO and get a shot. Like, I just think whenever the clock's going down and if Book or CP doesn't have the ball, I just think it's going to be bad. Like, I just think if it gets stuck in Cam Johnson's hands and there's 7 seconds on the clock, I just cash that possession done. Like, regardless of who it is, if it's one of them, I just –
Yeah, like, can it be one of them? That's what I was just gonna say. Like,
yeah, like Monty, it sounded like yesterday, James Jones is still hoping that Mikal becomes a dude that can get you off the dribble, or Cam Johnson can turn into one of those dudes, or Cam Payne like he was before. Everybody found out he only had one hand. Like, I just think that we just don't have a dude that can ISO in really crunch time situations when you need your stars to get a rest. Like, we texted about it yesterday. Jordan Poole can give you 30 plus minutes and you are so fine with it. Like, you're confident that he can run the show, that he can get a bucket, that if he gets switched on a big, he's getting a bucket. Like, I just think having just a player in your second unit while your stars rest, that is a big deal, to just be confident in one person at least to just get a shot.
Yeah, I talked about this on Tuesday with Kellen too, that I was really interested. My ears kind of perked up when Monty mentioned the confidence aspect of that young core, and the thing that surprised him about what they weren't able to accomplish in that second round is that, guys were getting some space to attack a closeout, or, the ball was ending up in their hands after, some good ball movement, and nothing was happening.
Yeah. Spencer Dinwiddie was coming in and confidently getting shots up and going off the dribble. And I just think every team needs a player that can do that. And I think we kind of got fool's golded a little bit with what Cam Payne did in the first 2 rounds last year, that we were like, yeah, he can do that. And I just think that doing that kind of put us in like a really bad spot.
Yeah. And I guess not wanting to jeopardize first round picks or continuity or chemistry or whatever it was that made James Jones not go get a guy like that at the deadline, right? I mean, we've been talking about it for a while, but like there were players like at least somewhat able to go do that type of thing, and they just didn't think that was going to matter, and it turned out to be the thing that was their downfall again.
Yeah. We talked about it at the deadline. Me and you
about
were
it all
like,
year.
Yeah, we're like, we need a person in the second unit that can get a bucket because we go cold, and we went so cold, like probably the coldest you could ever go.
Yeah, I will say, like, I do have a little bit of concern at this point. Now, I'm also the one. I have such a hot and cold relationship with Mikal. Like, some days you will not hear anybody who's a bigger fan of his than me, and then there's games, like Game 7 where it's like, man, like, will he ever have that mentality to just take over like that? I don't know. I don't know if that feels comfortable to him, but I also feel like then you look at guys like Paul George and others where it's like they develop slowly. Jaylen Brown, I think you could say the same thing. Like, Jaylen Brown wasn't a reliable scorer till like last season. He had been in the league for a long time before you really felt good about him. So I don't know. There's times where I'm like, I don't think you can count on it being Mikal or Cam Johnson to get to that level, to be another guy like that. But then there's other days where I'm like, well, why not? Why can't it be them? They're on a great trajectory, and they've gotten better every season of their career. Cam Johnson's only in his third season. Mikal's only in his about to be in his fifth. So I don't know, but let's do this. We'll have obviously all this to continue to talk about all off season, but we're going to do staying or leaving Suns edition, and it's going to be rapid fire. So, I mean, it doesn't have to just be one word. You can give me your thoughts explanation wise, but basically just off the cuff, we're 1 week out of the game 7. Do we think these guys will be part of this team next season or not? All right.
All right.
We just talked about him, and here's where we'll start. Campaign, yes or no? Staying or leaving?
Leaving.
Okay.
It's a 1 year. He signed a 1 year, right?
No, it's a 3-year deal, and it's just not all the way guaranteed. I think next season's fully guaranteed, though. It's the third year that's
yeah. I just don't think his drop-off was too big. You can't defend on that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, and I also think his money is big enough where you don't want it. It's not like he's on a minimum where it's like, all right, maybe we keep him, but then he's just on a smaller role. It's like, well, if you're paying a guy like that, you kind of need him to produce. So maybe
he was literally unplayable.
Yeah. and it's hard to see where his game goes because he feels young, but he's not. You know? Yeah. Chris Paul, staying or leaving?
Staying.
I agree with you. Yeah, I'm not ready to say any of that until we hear much worse problems between people or some massive thing comes along that they have to use Chris as a trade thing. You can't.
The deal would have to be too good, but I just think you have to run it back. Regardless, I think this team wins 47 to 50 games next year. I just think he has to stay still. It would have to be a really good deal, and the guard would have to be amazing or whoever it is.
It's the same thing as Ayton, where it's it's hard to imagine a trade where it looks so much better. The team's so much better that you're willing to get rid of a core player for yourself, you know?
Yeah.
All right, Jay Crowder, staying or leaving?
I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think he's gone.
Me too. I hate that for him, though.
Yeah.
He can't stay on a damn team, and he helps every single team he's on.
I just think it's kind of run its course. I just think it's done.
That dude is also hosting a bunch of pool parties as part of the Suns partnership with the Indian tribe too. And that's just a bummer. I just have a vision of him DJing or hosting one of these pool parties. And then the Woj bomb drops and it's Jay, you're not a Sun anymore, buddy. You got to go.
I just think it's run
on the tarmac.
I think it's run its course, but I think in the game 6 and 7, he seemed like the only person that knew how important those games were. I think he understands the moment, and you kind of need a vet like that on your team. But I just don't. I think they're just going to go away from it.
I think that speaks to something bigger that I'm starting to believe pretty adamantly is no matter what changes happen, and I do think there's going to be a pretty substantial change, is you can't allow the team to get too young.
Yeah.
Because whether they made a big difference in the end result or not, I think it matters to have Jay Crowder, JaVale McGee, Chris Paul on this team. I think that is important, and this core is still young enough that I don't think you just kind of throw them to the wolves, go get every young role player you can and reset, and Chris Paul's the only guy over 30. I don't love that. So, but I do think Crowder's going to leave. And the bottom line is, actually, I'll say that because there's some other guys coming up that explain that a little bit too. All right, DeAndre Ayton, staying or leaving?
Staying. People think we're not going to match it. I just think everybody's he's gone. The ball's in his court. No, we have all the control. And I just think people forget that part, that it's still all of the Suns' control. And I just think they're going to do their best to squash all of that and bring him back.
It's definitely 100% the smartest thing to do to keep him. I just have a little bit of me that wonders if things get bad, that would just not be worth it, and you're okay kind of punting a little bit. I mean, it would make the team worse. Don't get me wrong. I talked about this yesterday on the show. You're not getting better with an Ayton trade, most likely. But, maybe there's something that comes along where it's like, okay, we're able to be close to as good, and maybe we get a pick and we just say, okay, let's move on. But I tend to agree with you. I'll say staying for him. Cam Johnson, staying or leaving?
Staying. I think we're having a way different conversation if he doesn't get that injury after the Knicks game. I think he was just a flamethrower.
That might have been the number one turning point in the entire season. Talk about like from like ecstasy to agony in one moment. He goes from that shot to you're like, damn, his season's ruined too. Like,
yeah, like knowing, and that was like just a bench player knowing that we have a dude that can do that. He was confident. He was a flamethrower. How many? He had like 38. Is that what it was?
Yeah, something like that.
37, yeah, I think just knowing that you have a bench player, and he was doing everything. He was inside, he was outside, he was dribbling confidently, and like just doing all the stuff that you want.
Defending Julius Randle in the post.
Yeah, in the playoffs to do, and it was gone in like an instance. And I just think we are having a different conversation if he doesn't hurt his thigh. Like, I just don't think he ever got it back.
Yeah, I mean, there is a little bit of an injury concern about him, I think, in general, because he's been hurt basically every season of his career. He's had to miss time. And what's funny is it's not even the back, or the hips, which was the thing that was the red flag that made him, get all those bad draft reports before the Suns took him 11, was like, oh, he's not going to stay healthy because his hips are going to go out. It's like, no, he's been fine. The surgery's worked after North Carolina, but it's everything else. So I think there's a little bit that you have to worry about, and that'll be part of the extension stuff. But the other cool part about that Knicks game was that was also the night Cam Payne had like 17 assists. So it's like two things that never happened again happened that night. But I think I agree. I will say Cam being extension eligible and still on his rookie contract, having basically 5 more years of team control and being already a role player that can compete, he's the single best trade chip on this Suns team. I think I would even put him over Ayton, because Ayton is not really a good trade chip right now because of the restricted free agency stuff. So
a wing that can shoot threes, like, I think a lot of people would go for it.
So if you're talking about keeping Ayton and improving a different way, throwing a bunch of stuff together and then having Cam Johnson be the cherry on top, maybe some picks too, like that's your package basically.
Yeah. And then it would be like, just in the most insane case scenario, I think if we ever did think about moving CP, I think Cam Johnson would be the person that's added on to that.
Yeah, to make it palatable for the other team, basically. Like, if it's some wild situation where it's like Chris Paul for Damian Lillard, you need some. Chris Paul is not as good as Damian Lillard, so you have to sweeten it. Like, and that's not going to just be true this offseason, but that'll be true going forward if there ever is a Chris Paul trade. So you got to be thinking about that. All right, the last one is somebody who Monty Williams included. I think James Jones may have also included in the young core, which is Mr. Landry Shamet. Staying or leaving?
I think he's done. It was like, I want him to be the player who he is sometimes. Like
the player he was in Game 5.
Yeah, sometimes he's explosive, confident, getting a bucket, and it's cool to watch. Like, I forget that he is explosive and he'll dunk on you sometimes, and he's like this player that just seems like he should be so much better. And I just think he never found his groove. I just think he was always in and out of different parts of the lineup, and at the last minute we're like, finally we're admitting Cam Payne can't play, we need you for this, and he just couldn't turn it on like that. And I don't think he'll be back.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, similar to what we talked about with Crowder and Cam Johnson, like he fits if you are thinking about trades, because he has a pretty big salary, and he's also like young enough where it's not like you're, giving a team some player that's just going to be sitting on their, 15th roster spot. Like if he was traded, he would go play somewhere. He'd get minutes. And he's also a big enough contract where he can help you get up to a bigger player if you're trying to get one.
Yeah.
So he's the obvious. And that was honestly, like, if you ask James Jones, to be honest with you, he probably would say that was why they signed the extension, much more so than believing he was going to be this vital part of their team. Like, that was always a very tradable extension. I know James Jones would slap me in the face for talking about players as assets, But look, you're a general manager. We don't have to be ridiculous. Like that's what Landry is right now, is mostly a trade option more so than anything else. But they also seem to keep talking about him as a guy who they think they can get better with next season. So I would probably say leaving, because I think that they feel enough pressure to get better, and I just don't really see a trade to get better that he's not in.
Yeah.
All right. That'll wrap us up for the week. I appreciate you guys dealing with my day off earlier in the week. I went and saw Doctor Strange and just tried to not think about anything revolving the colors orange or purple, and moved on completely. But we're not going anywhere. Daily show. It'll stay that way until like August, September, when you guys aren't caring about the NBA anymore. And then I'll take a break and go down to like 3 times a week. But don't have to worry about that. There's a ton to talk about. This team is not going to get less interesting anytime soon. So hit subscribe, hit follow wherever you are listening or watching, and we'll be here every step of the way together. Also, go support Aaron. Go watch All Caps NBA on the Take Line YouTube channel. And go make Locked On NBA now, guys, your second listen to catch up on everything else going on around the NBA. I'm on the show tonight, so if you want to hear my voice a little bit more, catch up on the Eastern Conference Finals, all that good stuff, that'll be there. And I will talk to you guys Monday.